What if the Great Walls of Constantinople had held firm in 1453 and the city had never fallen to the Ottomans? In this video, we dive deep into one of history's most intriguing what-if scenarios, exploring how the survival of the Byzantine Empire could have reshaped global trade routes, delayed or altered the age of exploration, changed the balance of power between East and West, and perhaps even impacted the course of the Renaissance and the rise of modern Europe. In 1453, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II launched one of the most ambitious military campaigns of the medieval world, the Siege of Constantinople. The city, once the proud capital of the Eastern Roman, Byzantine Empire, had already endured centuries of decline, but its massive Theodosian walls had repelled countless invasions before. Now, imagine if they had succeeded one final time. If the Ottomans, despite their cannons and numerical superiority, had failed to breach the city, what would this have meant for history? First, the fall of Constantinople was more than just a military victory. It was a symbolic end to the Roman Empire and a powerful statement of Ottoman ascendance. If the siege had failed, the Byzantine Empire, though weakened, could have continued as a political and religious stronghold in the East. Its survival would have sent shockwaves across Europe and the Muslim world. The Christian kingdoms, many of which had been complacent or fragmented, might have rallied in support of the Byzantines, leading to renewed crusading zeal or diplomatic alliances. For the Ottomans, a failed siege could have significantly undermined Mehmed II's authority. His prestige was tied to this conquest. Without it, internal dissent or rival claimants to the throne could have emerged. The expansion of Ottoman influence into the Balkans and Central Europe might have been delayed or taken an entirely different path. Moreover, Constantinople's survival would have preserved a strategic, cultural, and economic hub between East and West. As the gateway to Asia, it could have remained a vital trading post, possibly maintaining the traditional Silk Road connections that had linked Europe to the East for centuries, possibly delaying the push for sea-based exploration that followed in its wake. In this alternate timeline, 1453 would no longer be remembered as the dramatic end of one world order and the birth of another. Instead, it would mark a miraculous stand, a final moment when the old world held its ground, and history took a very different turn. If Constantinople had withstood the Ottoman siege in 1453, it wouldn't just have been a military victory. It would have meant the survival of the Byzantine Empire, the last vestige of the Roman world. This enduring Christian state in the East could have dramatically reshaped the religious and political dynamics of both Europe and the Near East. At the time of the siege, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self, reduced to little more than the city of Constantinople and a few outlying territories. But survival could have offered it a chance to rebuild. With renewed legitimacy and symbolic strength from defeating the Ottomans, the empire might have drawn increased support from Western Europe, particularly the papacy, which had long desired to reconcile the Eastern Orthodox Church with the Roman Catholic Church. This might have accelerated or deepened efforts to reunify Christianity after the East-West Schism of 1054. A surviving Byzantium could have become a bridge between the Orthodox and Catholic worlds, potentially preventing centuries of division and rivalry within Christendom. Religious unity could have led to stronger military alliances against external threats, such as the Ottomans or later Muslim powers in the region. Politically, the existence of a stable Eastern Christian empire could have acted as a buffer between the Islamic world and Europe. This may have slowed or redirected Ottoman expansion into the Balkans, Hungary, and beyond. A surviving Byzantium might have also influenced the emerging Russian Tsardom, which saw itself as the Third Rome after the fall of Constantinople. With Byzantium still intact, Russia's religious and imperial ideology might have developed very differently, perhaps with less emphasis on Moscow as the successor of Rome. Moreover, the Byzantine model of governance, rooted in imperial authority, fused with Christian doctrine, might have continued to influence neighboring states. The empire's preservation of ancient Greek and Roman knowledge, as well as its deeply theological worldview, could have contributed to an intellectual and cultural revival centered in Constantinople rather than Italy, possibly creating an alternative or a parallel Renaissance in the East. In short, a surviving Byzantium wouldn't just have been another small Christian kingdom. It would have been a living symbol of continuity from antiquity to the modern world, shaping everything from religious unity to geopolitical alignments across Europe and the Near East. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was not just a victory for the Ottomans. It was a defining moment for the Islamic world. The conquest of this once mighty Christian capital was seen as the fulfillment of a long-standing Islamic prophecy and cemented the Ottomans as the premier Muslim power of the time. But what if the siege had failed? What if Constantinople had remained under Christian Byzantine control? Had the Ottomans failed to capture Constantinople, their reputation and perceived divine mandate would have suffered a major blow. Sultan Mehmed II had tied his legitimacy and ambition to this conquest. A defeat could have severely damaged his authority, potentially leading to unrest within the empire or even rebellions by rival factions or provinces seeking autonomy. Without the symbolic capital of Constantinople, the Ottomans might have struggled to present themselves as the rightful leaders of the Islamic world. This failure could have also emboldened rival Muslim powers. The Mamluks in Egypt, for instance, might have retained their influence longer, resisting Ottoman encroachment in the Arab world. Similarly, Persian powers like the Timurids, or later, the Safavids, could have risen more quickly or expanded further without Ottoman interference. The Muslim world could have been more fragmented, with no single dominant Sunni empire to unify or standardize Islamic practice and law. Geographically, Ottoman expansion into southeastern Europe might have slowed or taken a different route. Without Constantinople as a strategic base, controlling the Balkans, Hungary, and parts of Central Europe would have been more difficult. The spread of Islam into these areas may have been delayed or even halted entirely, changing the religious makeup of parts of Eastern Europe. There might also have been a redirection of Ottoman energy, either toward consolidating control in Anatolia and the Middle East, or toward maritime expansion in the Mediterranean. Without the symbolic and logistical advantages of Constantinople, the Ottomans may have focused more on naval dominance, clashing sooner and more aggressively with European powers like Venice, Genoa, or even Portugal and Spain in North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. Culturally and intellectually, the fall of Constantinople marked a moment when Islamic scholars, artisans, and administrators flowed into the city, turning it into a cultural jewel of the Muslim world. Without this conquest, the Ottomans may have lacked a comparable capital to attract and centralize such talent, potentially limiting the flourishing of Islamic architecture, art, and scholarship that followed. In essence, a failed siege would not only have reshaped the political map, but could have disrupted the ideological and religious trajectory of Islam's influence in both Europe and the broader Islamic world. It may have marked the high-water point of Ottoman ambition, after which Islamic expansion, rather than accelerating, would begin to fragment or retreat. One of the most significant consequences of the fall of Constantinople in 1453 was the disruption of long-standing land-based trade routes between Europe and Asia. For centuries, Constantinople had been a key hub on the Silk Road, connecting merchants from Venice, Genoa, and other European cities with markets as far east as China and India. When the Ottomans captured the city, they gained control over this crucial gateway between East and West, and the flow of goods, ideas, and wealth was suddenly under new management. Now, imagine if Constantinople had never fallen. The Byzantine Empire, weakened but still standing, would have continued to serve as a stable bridge for East-West commerce. European merchants would likely have kept using these land routes without the same level of interference, taxation, or political uncertainty introduced by Ottoman control. Spices, silk, porcelain, and other luxury goods from Asia could have continued flowing into Europe through overland channels, reducing the urgency to find alternative paths. This raises a crucial question. Would the age of exploration have still happened? Without the disruption of overland trade, European nations might not have felt the same economic pressure to find direct sea routes to Asia. Portugal's expeditions down the African coast, and eventually around the Cape of Good Hope, might have been slower or less ambitious. Similarly, Spain's decision to sponsor Columbus's westward voyage across the Atlantic in search of India could have been delayed or deprioritized, since overland trade was still functioning. That said, curiosity, competition, and the desire for profit were strong motivations in 15th century Europe. Maritime exploration may still have occurred, but likely at a slower pace and perhaps with a different emphasis. Instead of being a response to lost trade access, exploration might have been driven more by prestige, missionary zeal, or technological innovation rather than economic necessity. Furthermore, the rise of powerful merchant empires in Venice and Genoa, which had deep commercial ties to Byzantium, might have continued to dominate Mediterranean trade. This would have reinforced the importance of land and sea routes through the eastern Mediterranean, making these regions even more geopolitically central in the centuries to follow. In this alternate timeline, the economic center of gravity might have remained in the eastern Mediterranean longer, rather than shifting to the Atlantic seaboard with powers like Portugal, Spain, England, and the Netherlands. The colonization of the Americas, the expansion of maritime empires, and even the transatlantic slave trade may have evolved differently, or more slowly. In short, the uninterrupted survival of Constantinople could have delayed or significantly altered the course of the age of exploration. The world's great navigational voyages, far-flung empires, and global trade networks might still have emerged, but on a different timeline and perhaps under different leaders. If Constantinople had survived the Ottoman siege and remained under Byzantine control, the ripple effects on European commerce, especially in the Mediterranean, would have been profound. The city was not just a political capital, it was a vital commercial hub that linked Europe with Asia. Its fall in 1453 reshaped the economic landscape of Europe, but its survival could have prolonged the dominance of certain powers, while slowing the rise of others. Let's start with Venice and Genoa, the two great maritime republics of Renaissance Italy. Both had long-established trade agreements with the Byzantines and maintained privileged access to Eastern goods like spices, silk, and precious metals. If the Byzantine Empire had endured, these agreements could have continued or even expanded. With Constantinople still functioning as a secure and familiar gateway to Asia, Venetian and Genoese merchants would likely have strengthened their monopolies over East-West trade. This could have cemented the economic dominance of the Italian city-states for a much longer period. Venice, in particular, may have continued to flourish as the commercial heart of Europe, amassing even more wealth and influence. Genoa, already a formidable rival, might have avoided the decline it later suffered after losing key markets to the rising Atlantic powers. On the other hand, emerging Western European economies, such as Spain, Portugal, France, and later England and the Netherlands, might have remained secondary players for longer. The rise of these powers was closely tied to the disruption of traditional trade routes after the fall of Constantinople, which drove them to explore new sea paths to India, China, and the New World. Without that disruption, they might not have had the same economic incentive or geopolitical urgency to embark on overseas expansion. This means the center of European economic gravity may have stayed rooted in the Mediterranean rather than shifting west to the Atlantic. Major innovations in navigation, shipbuilding, and global finance, which were accelerated by the race for oceanic trade, could have been delayed or taken different forms. The Italian city-states, rather than cities like Lisbon, Seville, or London, might have remained the epicenters of international banking and commerce. Moreover, the Ottoman Empire itself might have been less able to dominate regional trade. After capturing Constantinople, the Ottomans gained a powerful position to control or tax goods passing between continents. Without that advantage, their ability to cut off or manipulate European access to Asian markets would have been greatly reduced, preserving more open and stable trade networks. In this alternate reality, the winners would have been the Byzantine Empire, Venice, Genoa, and perhaps the Eastern Mediterranean as a whole. The losers may have been the rising Atlantic powers, who would have had to wait longer or take riskier routes to achieve global prominence. In summary, had Constantinople remained under Byzantine control, the economic map of Europe could have looked very different. One in which the old centers of Mediterranean power retained their grip on wealth and influence, and the dawn of the modern global economy arrived more slowly and unevenly. The Renaissance, Europe's great cultural and intellectual rebirth, was already underway in Italy by the early 15th century. But the fall of Constantinople in 1453 played a pivotal role in accelerating and shaping its course. As the Byzantine capital fell to the Ottomans, a wave of Greek-speaking scholars, artists, philosophers, and scribes fled westward, especially to Italian city-states like Florence, Venice, and Rome. They brought with them precious manuscripts, classical knowledge, and a deep understanding of ancient Greek philosophy, science, and literature. Now, imagine if Constantinople had not fallen in this alternate scenario. Those scholars would not have needed to flee. The Byzantine Empire, long known as the protector of classical Greco-Roman heritage, might have continued to serve as a living reservoir of ancient wisdom. But instead of that knowledge diffusing westward in a wave of exile, it might have remained more localized, centered in Constantinople itself. This opens up two possibilities. 1. The Renaissance may have spread more slowly in Western Europe without the influx of Byzantine scholars and texts into Italy. The pace and intensity of the Italian Renaissance might have been delayed or softened. Many foundational figures of the Renaissance, such as Marsilio Ficino and Lorenzo Valla, were directly influenced by newly accessible Greek texts, including Plato, Aristotle, and early Christian thinkers. If these texts had stayed in Constantinople under Byzantine protection, they may not have had the same immediate impact in Italy. The explosion of humanist thought, classical revival, and scientific curiosity that characterized the Renaissance may have emerged more gradually, and perhaps more narrowly, within elite academic circles rather than becoming a widespread cultural movement. Point 2. Constantinople itself could have become a Renaissance capital. On the other hand, if the Byzantine Empire had stabilized after resisting the Ottomans, Constantinople could have experienced its own version of the Renaissance. Already rich in intellectual and theological tradition, the city could have become a flourishing center for classical studies, art, and architecture, blending Orthodox Christian, Hellenistic, and even emerging Western influences into a unique cultural revival. This Byzantine Renaissance might have created an Eastern counterpart to the Italian one, with scholars and artists from across Europe and the Muslim world converging on Constantinople instead of Florence or Rome. The Eastern Roman heritage, already focused on preserving and commenting on ancient texts, might have developed new artistic and philosophical schools, blending ancient Greek traditions with Christian theology and Byzantine aesthetics. The conquest of Constantinople in 1453 was a defining moment in the rise of the Ottoman Empire. It gave the Ottomans not only a new capital, but also immense symbolic legitimacy as heirs to both the Roman and Islamic imperial traditions. Without this victory, the trajectory of the empire could have been dramatically different, less confident, more fragmented, and possibly more vulnerable to both internal and external pressures. Politically, failing to capture Constantinople would have dealt a serious blow to Sultan Mehmed II's prestige. His campaign to take the city was framed as a holy mission and a fulfillment of Islamic prophecy. A failed siege might have undermined his authority and emboldened rival factions within the Ottoman elite. This could have led to power struggles or revolts, particularly in the early stages of the empire's consolidation. Mehmed's ambition to transform the Ottomans from a frontier state into a true imperial power may have been stalled or derailed. Geographically, the empire's expansion into southeastern Europe would likely have slowed. Constantinople served as a strategic base for military campaigns into the Balkans, Hungary, and beyond. Without it, Ottoman control over the region would have been less secure and more fragmented. The Balkans might have remained a patchwork of Christian kingdoms and semi-independent principalities for much longer, possibly delaying Ottoman dominance in Europe by decades. Alternatively, the Ottomans may have redirected their focus eastward, seeking to expand more aggressively into Anatolia, Persia, or the Arab world sooner than they did historically. Militarily, Constantinople's fortifications, infrastructure, and location made it a perfect capital for projecting power in all directions. Without it, the Ottomans would have had to rely on less ideal centers like Edirne or Bursa, limiting their ability to administer a vast empire efficiently. The symbolic power of Constantinople as the new Rome also helped attract scholars, administrators, and artisans, transforming the city into a cultural and political heart of the Islamic world. Without this magnet, the Ottomans might have lacked the centralizing force that helped them build a cohesive imperial identity. Furthermore, without the prestige of capturing Constantinople, the Ottomans might have faced greater challenges in asserting their leadership over the broader Muslim world. Their claim to the caliphate, which was eventually recognized in later centuries, may have been questioned or denied entirely. Other Muslim powers like the Mamluks in Egypt or rising Persian dynasties might have contested Ottoman supremacy more aggressively and effectively. In essence, being denied Constantinople could have redefined the Ottoman Empire from a confident, centralized, and globally influential power into a more regional, fragmented, and contested state. It might still have risen, but not with the same force, direction, or historical impact that we know today. If Constantinople had resisted the Ottoman conquest, the religious landscape of southeastern Europe and the Near East would likely have remained significantly different from what history recorded. Constantinople was not only a political and economic hub, but also a vital spiritual center for Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Its fall in 1453 marked a major shift in religious power, as the Ottomans established Islam as the dominant faith in the region. Had the Byzantine Empire endured, Eastern Orthodox Christianity would have retained a strong foothold in its historic heartland. The Patriarchate of Constantinople, which held immense religious authority for millions of Orthodox Christians, would have continued to guide and unify the faithful across the Balkans, Asia Minor, and beyond. This might have helped prevent or at least slow the decline of Christianity in these areas, preserving churches, monasteries, and traditions that were often suppressed or transformed under Ottoman rule. Islam's expansion into southeastern Europe, particularly the Balkans, was closely tied to Ottoman political and military dominance. With Constantinople still under Christian control, Ottoman advances into Europe might have been halted or slowed, limiting the spread of Islam through conquests, conversions, and demographic changes. Regions like Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, and Hungary could have maintained stronger Christian identities for a longer period, resisting Islamization and retaining their cultural and religious traditions. Moreover, the presence of a powerful Christian empire in the East could have influenced the broader religious dynamics between Christianity and Islam. It might have encouraged greater unity among Christian states, possibly fostering alliances to counter Muslim expansion. This religious resistance could have altered the course of conflicts like the Crusades' later echoes or the wars between Christian and Ottoman forces in the centuries that followed. At the same time, the Ottoman Empire's role as a center of Islamic culture, law, and spirituality would have been diminished without Constantinople. The city became a symbolic capital for Sunni Islam, and its loss weakened the Christian presence, allowing Islam to flourish and spread in southeastern Europe. Without this shift, Islam's political and religious influence in Europe might have remained more confined to Anatolia and the Middle East. In summary, if Constantinople had survived, Christianity would likely have remained stronger and more unified in the East, while the spread of Islam into southeastern Europe would have been slowed or limited. The religious map of the region would have preserved a more balanced and contested coexistence, with Christianity continuing to play a major role in shaping the culture, politics, and identity of southeastern Europe and the Near East. The Eastern Question refers to the diplomatic and political challenges that arose in the 19th century as the Ottoman Empire weakened and European powers vied to fill the power vacuum in the strategically crucial regions of southeastern Europe and the Near East. Central to this question was the control of the Bosporus Strait and the city of Constantinople, key gateways between Europe and Asia, and vital maritime choke points for trade and military movement. If the Ottomans had never captured Constantinople, and the Byzantine Empire or another Christian power retained control of the Bosporus, the entire course of 19th century geopolitics might have been reshaped. For one, the Ottoman Empire would likely have been far weaker or less territorially extensive, perhaps even failing to exist as a major player. This would have dramatically altered the balance of power in southeastern Europe and the eastern Mediterranean. European powers, especially Russia, Britain, Austria-Hungary, and France, had competing interests in the fate of the Ottoman territories, with Russia eager to gain access to warm water ports and Britain focused on protecting routes to India. Without Ottoman control over the Bosporus, the strategic importance of this region might have been less about preserving Ottoman sovereignty and more about direct control or influence over a smaller Byzantine or successor state. This could have led to an earlier or different kind of imperial competition. Instead of a slow decline of Ottoman authority provoking crises like the Crimean War or the Balkan uprisings, Europe might have dealt with a fragmented mosaic of smaller states or a more robust Byzantine state acting as a buffer. Diplomatic conflicts might have centered around who controlled the straits and access to the Black Sea, but with a different set of players and alliances. Furthermore, the loss of Ottoman control would have likely changed the nature of nationalist movements in the Balkans. Many of these movements gained momentum in the 19th century by seeking independence from Ottoman rule. Without the Ottomans as a unifying authority, the dynamics of ethnic and religious identities in the region could have evolved differently, potentially producing earlier or different forms of nation-states. Alliances or conflicts that in terms of imperialism, Britain and France might have focused less on defending Ottoman territorial integrity and more on expanding their own influence directly in the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Russia's ambition to control the straits and project power into the Mediterranean might have faced different obstacles or opportunities, possibly leading to an altered pattern of wars and treaties that in some. Without Ottoman control of Constantinople and the Bosporus, the Eastern question, as it unfolded in the 19th century, would have been fundamentally different. The geopolitical struggles over southeastern Europe and the Near East might have been more fragmented, involving different actors, alliances, and outcomes, shaping the course of European imperialism and international relations in ways that could have delayed, altered, or even prevented many of the conflicts and diplomatic crises that defined the era. If the Byzantine Empire had survived the Ottoman siege and continued to exist into the modern era, the political map of southeastern Europe, the Near East, and even beyond would likely be unrecognizable compared to today's borders. The survival of Byzantium would have acted as a powerful stabilizing force in a region that historically experienced centuries of conquest, fragmentation, and shifting empires. For starters, the Balkans might have remained more unified under Byzantine or Byzantine-influenced rule, instead of the patchwork of nation-states that emerged after centuries of Ottoman rule and later nationalist movements, such as Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, Albania, and others. The region might have been consolidated into a larger Byzantine realm, or a federation of closely aligned states loyal to Constantinople. This could have prevented some of the ethnic conflicts and border disputes that plagued the Balkans in the 19th and 20th centuries. Enduring Byzantium would also have influenced the development of neighboring powers like Russia and the various Central European kingdoms. Russia's historical role as the Third Rome might have been diminished or transformed, as Constantinople would still be the spiritual and political center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. This might have altered Russia's expansionist policies, its imperial ambitions, and its relations with both Europe and Asia. In Anatolia and the Near East, without Ottoman control, the region could have seen a very different configuration of states. The Byzantine Empire might have retained parts of Asia Minor and the Eastern Mediterranean, possibly evolving into a multi-ethnic empire with a mix of Christian, Muslim, and other populations coexisting under Byzantine governance. Alternatively, smaller successor states or local powers might have emerged, but none with the expansive reach of the historical Ottoman Empire. The Middle East borders might have developed differently as well, potentially affecting the emergence of modern states like Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. Without the Ottoman legacy, the colonial partitions and mandates of the 20th century might have taken on a different character or occurred under different circumstances. Moreover, European powers' influence in the Eastern Mediterranean could have been curtailed or altered. The Byzantine Empire might have acted as a stronger regional counterbalance to Venetian, Genoese, and later Western European ambitions, preserving a distinct Eastern Christian cultural and political sphere that I in the broader sense. The absence of Ottoman control and influence could have delayed or prevented the rise of nationalism in some regions, while fostering a more imperial or multicultural political order based on Byzantine traditions. The legacy of Roman law, Byzantine administration, and Orthodox Christianity might have shaped governance, identity, and diplomacy across a vast territory well into modern times. Ultimately, the survival of Byzantium could have produced a map where the modern nation-state system in southeastern Europe and the Near East looked very different, less fragmented, more influenced by imperial and religious continuity, and with powerful regional centers anchored in Constantinople rather than Istanbul or other capitals that arose later. This alternate world would reflect centuries of a very different historical trajectory, with lost empires remembered not as distant relics, but as enduring political realities.